Welcome to this short talk on sight reading. I've called it Improve Your Sight Reading because I really want to give you some ideas how you can literally improve your sight reading. There are some people who just seem to think I can't sight read for whatever reason. Maybe they were told this at some point, but I distinctly do not believe that to be the case. I think we can all learn to sight read. It's a technique, just as we have clarinet and saxophone technique, we can have sight reading technique. And I want to kind of get you into a place where that's not how you feel when maybe you're given some sight reading at an exam or you have to do some sight reading. I don't want it to be something that creates anxiety. Just to answer the question, first of all, what is the point of sight reading? And of course, I'm sure you all know the various really important reasons. It allows us to learn music more quickly. If we can just read it without having to spend ages kind of working stuff out, we can learn it more quickly. Which allows us to become much more independent. We don't need someone, a teacher, for example, to tell us this is how it goes. If you're doing exams or you're sight reading in an orchestra, you'll get more marks at exams. You'll be able to do that orchestral playing more successfully and more quickly. And indeed, it changes the role of teaching and learning and practice because we can read the music. We don't have to worry about that aspect of it. We can straight away get straight into the music. And there is one more reason, a very important one, I think, which is that if we can all sight read, then it guarantees the continuation of this great art. We can just pick some music up and we can read it. We don't need some special person to tell us how it goes. We can all do that, and therefore it guarantees the continuation of this great art. What will make you a better sight reader? I want to narrow this down to three areas. These areas: knowledge, temperament, and technique. When it comes to knowledge, what I mean here really is understanding what you see. Music, notational music, is written in a certain particular way, and we have to understand it. We need to know exactly what we are seeing means. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Temperament is how we feel, and I want you to feel conscious that you are in charge of your sight reading. You can do it. You don't have this anxiety. When you think about sight reading, you feel, I can do this. You feel positive, and that's very important. Otherwise, there's going to be blocks. And the third is technique, and that really is what most of this session is going to be about, how we do it. And I want to show you really in the next few minutes how we do it. And I want to present it in such a way that you feel you can develop the technique. Just as we can develop our clarinet or saxophone technique, we can develop our sight reading technique. So how do we do it? Well, obviously we read with our eye. I'm not going to go into any details of the eye. It's quite a complicated piece of machinery. And it does a lot of good for us. It's not really so much seeing the music, but it's the connection that the eye makes with the brain, the processing that then goes on, and then what we actually do. And I'm going to give you some rather fun exercises to do, some rather fun little games here. And we're going to start off with language. So I'm going to put some words on the screen just for a moment and allow you to read them. Now you're only going to see these. They're going to come very much in the middle of the screen, and you only see them for a moment. But let's see how well you get on. Here's the first one. So did you get that? Of course, the cat sat on the mat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. And I think it was on the screen for about, I wouldn't like to say exactly, maybe 0.6 of a second, certainly under a second. And it's a phrase that we know, short words, but you got that in pretty much immediately under a second. Here's the next one. Did you get that? 11 words, if you know your Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question. But again, you didn't have to read each word. I think you probably got it. 11 words, which you read well under a second. Okay, here's the next one. Did you get that? The name of a most important series of books, which we're going to talk about in a moment. I wonder whether you got that one. It was on there for a little bit longer. It's a lovely day today, but it was upside down and back to front. But I reckon a lot of you got that because the brain is so powerful that we immediately turn it the right way around and flip it over. The brain just can do that. Quite amazing. Okay, now the next few are musical ones. And as it were, have your clarinet or saxophone at the ready. You don't really have to do this, but I'm going to show you they're 3-note patterns. See whether you can catch these. Here's the first one. Did you get that? E, D, C. Next one coming up. Did you get that? That was on there for all of about maybe a second. F, A, G. And here's one more. And that was even less time there because I hope you just got that straight away as a triadic pattern, C major, G, E, C. And so basically what's happening is that our eyes are working like a camera, and each snap really can absorb a lot of material. And I want you to be conscious of this and also confident as well, that you can actually absorb a lot in a very short space of time. I want you to be aware of that because I want you to take that bit of this understanding and then, as it were, make yourself read these things quicker. So, you see a pattern and I want you to be aware of absorbing that pattern, processing it, kind of knowing what it is, and translating that into, playing those notes. I want you to be aware of that and then do it. And I think being aware of it allows you to do it. So the whole kind of overriding learning to read music, there's 3 sort of basic elements. The first of these 3 basic elements is rhythm, understanding rhythm and rhythm pattern. So what do I mean by this? What is having a sense of rhythm? Well, it's just really knowing these rhythms. There's a whole load of rhythms in those boxes there, and you kind of know these rhythms, and it's based on 2 things. The first is of immense importance. The first is pulse, and I want you to develop what we might call a sense of pulse. And here is a way of doing this. And you can do this exercise quite frequently to begin with, and until eventually you feel it's part of your makeup. It's simply this. We're going to take a pulse, which is going to be 4 on a bar. And here's how to develop that sense of pulse. Maybe you count it out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you just count a few bars out loud, maybe when you're walking along. Then from counting out loud, you whisper 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And then you mouth those words silently. You can't see me doing it, but I'm doing it now. You have a go. Now you stop mouthing the words silently. You simply hear the words inwardly in your head. And the final in this sequence of activities is that you stop hearing the words and replace the words with whatever you want to replace it with. A pulse, a pulsation, a throb. That is your sense of pulse. Different people have a different thing going on in their mind, and they have different words. Someone, I think, once described it to me as an echo. But it's that pulse, that throb, that pulsation in your mind, and eventually that is there all the time. That sense of pulse, which of course you determine before you're going to play something, what that sense of pulse, what that particular pulse is going to be, but that has always to be there. That's point number 1. And point number 2 is being able to subdivide that pulse. And I want you to feel that as it were, it's like a layer underneath the pulse, and you can turn that layer up so it becomes more strong in your mind. You can hear that subdivision of the pulse. And ultimately, I want you to be able to subdivide maybe up to 4 subdivisions in a pulse. So maybe you play this little game. When you're playing a scale, you hear this subdivision behind each note. bom 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 bom. You can make up your own, or maybe you play a scale and each note you feel a triplet subdivision, if you know you're going to play a piece with triplets in it, or a semiquaver subdivision. But the idea of this is that you're able to go from one subdivision to another, and really, if you understand that and you can do it, rhythm is never going to be a problem, because you're always going to understand exactly how long a note is to be played for, what that subdivision is, or whether there are more subdivisions, or you tie one note. For example, a dotted crotchet is 3 quavers, or maybe a crotchet tied onto the first of 2 quavers. You kind of understand that, and different ways of understanding it, and so rhythm never becomes a problem. And so having a sense of rhythm, being able to decode rhythm patterns instantly, is simply knowing pulse and knowing subdivision. The next is being able to recognize melodic patterns, and just in the same way that we did in that little exercise I gave you earlier on, you see a number of notes and you recognize the pattern. Maybe it's a scale pattern, maybe it's an arpeggio pattern, or a diminished or a dominant seventh, or it's some pattern, or it's a fifth. But you begin to recognize those patterns instantly. Your brain knows them, just like you recognize words, and that then will enable you to begin to read with much more fluency, less hesitation. And the final point is doing those two things together, combining rhythm patterns whilst maintaining a steady pulse. And I have just a couple of golden rules here to ensure that's going to happen. When you are sight reading, as long as there are no technical problems, as long as you know how to play the next note, then it's all going to really work. I want you to do some preparation, and in that preparation, you make sure that you feel, I really understand what I'm about to play. And as you're then playing, I want you to be aware of really processing. You're kind of aware that, as I'm reading this, I'm working quite hard, I'm processing quite fast. And if you're aware of this, at some point you get better at that and you won't even have to think about it. I want to give you a few of these skills now, which you can develop. All these skills are kind of developmental skills. They're aspects of sight reading, like all the various different aspects of playing our clarinets or saxophones. There are particular skills we can develop. I want you to know what the music sounds like. I always want you to have a go at hearing music in your head, internalizing it. Do this quite regularly. Even when you know a piece, you know what it sounds like. Sit down in a comfortable chair and just read the music in your head. I want you to get used to looking at music, reading it in your head, just in the same way that you can sit in a chair and read the newspaper or read a book. I want you to feel that you can read music in your head. Do this regularly. And that gets us away from this. Some people hear the symbols on the page, I'm going to play it, and that was unexpected. I don't want it to be like that. I don't want music, the code of music, the notation of music, I don't want it to be just code for doing something physical. When I see that sign, that note, I put those fingers down and it comes out as that note. Instead, here are the notational symbols. I understand them. I know what it sounds like, and then I do the physical thing to make it sound. I want you to really have a good idea of what it sounds like. It makes such a difference when you're sight reading to have that understanding. Another skill that we can develop, of course, is obviously knowing our keys, key signature, and key awareness. And key awareness, really, thinking in a key, relating the key signature to particular sounds and finger patterns. And so I really want you to practice your scales carefully, and understand, from notation, really understand what they are, and eventually you will have this key awareness. Before reading a piece, I want you in your mind to give a kind of running commentary. Here's an example. Here's a little piece. I want you to have these kind of thoughts. It's a two-note pattern going down, an upward pattern of a C major arpeggio, a two-note pattern going down, same as the first pattern, but an octave higher, a downward pattern, C major arpeggio going down. And so that will allow you to read in these particular, it's called saccadic movement, and you will be able to read each of those groups in one saccade, in one fixation. You don't need to look at each of those notes in the first group or the four notes, you just see it in one single fixation. And that, of course, allows you ultimately to read ahead, we all know that expression, and to read ahead accurately. So look at the music and actually give a run commentary in your head, say the words, and this will translate eventually into this ability to see these patterns in one grasp, understand what you're saying, and read more fluently. Here's another pattern coming up. I won't explain this one, but you can see these patterns. You will eventually be able to read them in one fixation, and so of course that means you're becoming much more fluent. And this together will start allowing you to look ahead in a much more confident kind of way, because you're understanding patterns, you're seeing them, your brain is processing them, and you look ahead. And I want you to be aware of this. So, I want you to be aware that maybe you're playing that downward scale pattern and you're aware that you are looking ahead and processing the next pattern. Again, very much connected with this, I want you to be developing your musical instinct. What do I mean by this? I'm going to give you a little paragraph here. Just read this to yourself quickly now. Did you get that? I'm sure you read it. But in fact, I made quite a lot of mistakes when I was typing that out. For example, accurately has got too many C's. And phrasing is missing an R, and articulation is incorrectly spelt, and prefix should be perfect, and in fact there's a grammatical mistake. The point I'm making here is that even though I made some mistakes, the intention, the meaning of that is exactly right. And so, if you've got a passage coming up and you see, that's basically a C major pattern, and maybe it has a note missed out. Maybe there's a third within the pattern, and maybe when you're playing it, you put the third in a different place. You miss out the wrong note, as it were. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter in sight reading. That the instinct is there. You've got the main idea of what that music was saying. If you make a small slip in it, it absolutely doesn't matter. Just in the way that it didn't matter that I'd made some mistakes in what I'd typed there. That the understanding is still there. And I want you to feel that if you are reading and you're having to read quite quickly, if you make a little slip, a note here and there, absolutely doesn't matter. The musical idea is still very much correct. Fingering is very much dependent on knowing your scales and arpeggios. So I want you to do a lot of scale and arpeggio work from scale and arpeggio books, just so that you're looking at scale and arpeggios quite a lot, just simple scales and arpeggios when you practice your scales and arpeggios, which is very important. Do a lot of that practice from notation. And this second idea here, if you're playing a piece in D major, I want you to kind of feel, my clarinet's in D major now, and the fingering of the note, got the F sharp coming up, C sharp across the break, then the next F sharp and the C sharp in the third register in the altissimo. Kind of feel those fingerings, you kind of feel it in your head, and you're kind of seeing the clarinet in D major, or whatever the key happens to be. It's quite a fun idea to think of the clarinet in that key, and then when you're in the key, hopefully, you'll get all those notes right. And I want you to be aware that as you are doing all this stuff, that we really are thinking faster. We really are thinking faster. And so we observe dynamic markings. It gives us a bit of brain space to observe dynamic markings and other marks of expression and articulation. We've got the brain space to do that. Just a quick bit now about practicing sight reading. Oh, there's that bit there. Forgive me, but maybe you might like to use this collection of books I've done, which really do help you. There's 3 books in the clarinet series, 1 so far, in the saxophone, but I am actually soon going to be working on grade 6 to 8 for saxophone. And it gives you a way of working that I think you will find very systematic and very developmental. And I just want to take you through some sample pages, but all the books, all the stages are done in the same way. This is from the grade 6 clarinet book, stage 2. I've chosen this for no particular reason. We start off with some rhythmical exercises, and I want you to do these very carefully. Be certain that you really understand rhythm. Obviously, starting at the grade 1, they're very simple. What you get is a rhythm, and underneath the rhythm we get a pulse. And I want you to feel that pulse. Count maybe a couple of bars in your head, maybe one bar in your head, and then feel the second bar as that sense of pulse, and understand how the rhythm pattern fits that sense of pulse. Sometimes I want you to be aware of the potential subdivision. So in that first one, a quaver subdivision might be useful. In ensuring that, for example, the second bar is exactly right and that dotted quaver is exactly the right length. In the second piece, we've got more interesting ones there, and maybe we want to be able to turn up the volume, as it were, on the triplet subdivision. Maybe we want to also turn the volume up a little bit on the semiquaver subdivision. I want you to feel as though you can go from one subdivision to another in your mind as you need to, and that will always allow you to get rhythm correct. Number 3 is obviously starting off with the basic pulse of a quaver subdivision. Do these rhythm exercises very carefully. Feel as though you absolutely understand it. Have a look at that number 1 again now. Just kind of glance through it, allow your eyes to go from beginning to end. Do you feel as you're looking at it, can you say to yourself, yes, I know how that goes. I know how to do those rhythms. I want to feel that you get to that stage. And as you prepare these rhythm exercises, as you're really understanding it, here's some thoughts in your mind. Decide on a good pulse first. Hear the rhythm in your head. Count 2 bars in or more before you actually do it. Learn to sense that pulse, that feeling of the pulse is there somewhere in your head. And maybe do the exercise in different ways. For example, you might have the sense of pulse in your head and you play the rhythm on your clarinet or saxophone just on one note. Or maybe you make up a little tune using that rhythm. Or maybe you do different tapping kind of exercises. You tap the rhythm with one hand and clap the rhythm with the other, and then reverse hands. Lots of different ways you can do that. Then we have some melodic exercises where we're actually going to take the rhythm and play music. And here, I want you to be very aware of the key. So these two, or the first exercise is in F sharp minor, the second one is in A major. Play the scale first. Have that real sense of the scale in your head. And look at it. Try your best to hear it in your head. It doesn't matter whether you're 100% right or not. Have a go. The more you do this, the better you will become at hearing the music in your head. Have a go. Do it, be confident, and then think to yourself, yeah, I know how that goes, I'm now going to play it. Don't play it until you're pretty certain that you know how it goes. So for the melodic exercises, thoughts in your head, check for any technical aspects first. I don't want there to be any technical problems. Try to hear it in your head as best you can. Feel that you are looking ahead. I want you to actually be aware that you are looking ahead of what you're playing. I want you to be aware of that, and you'll find you're doing it more. Don't hesitate. Concentrate as you're doing it. These are kind of ideas that you kind of do. You get better at doing those, and don't begin until you're certain you really understand the music and you're probably going to get it right. You may make a slip or two. Doesn't matter, because you feel as though you pretty much understand it. Doesn't matter if you make a slip or two. Don't forget to count yourself in. Then we have some what I call prepared pieces. You usually get 2 with each stage. And the prepared pieces come with some questions. And I want you to have a go at thinking these things through. Now, what does 5/4 mean? I know we know what it means, but it's good to articulate in your mind what it actually means. Count some bars of 5/4. What's the key? Play the scale. Look for scale patterns in the piece, or indeed arpeggio patterns. How do the opening melodic patterns develop? So in that first phrase, starts on that beat, then it comes again, but of course it's the same pattern, but it's a bit higher. And then the next bar, you can see it's the upbeat again, and then it's the same kind of phrase, but instead of the dotted crotchet, we turn it into 4 quavers. And then the upbeat becomes a crotchet, but the next rhythm is the same. Can you see what I mean? That all these bars, in a sense, are related. They're different, but they're related. I want you to understand that relationship all the time. Play the first note, do your best to hear it in your head. And also, of course, when you're sight reading, you want to put character in the music. So I want you to think, how am I going to put that marching character into this particular piece? So thoughts in your head. The questions there designed to encourage you to think about the music. Maybe make up your own. Give yourself a kind of running commentary. Expect to do dynamics and other marks of expression. Expect that there's going to be a bit of brain space to do that. If you understand the rhythm and the notes, of course there will be. And then evaluate your performance and try again if necessary. When you evaluate, be objective and observational. Don't kind of say, oh, I didn't do that very well. Say, this is how I did it. I observed myself doing this. Be objective and observational, never subjective. It's a much happier way of moving forward. And then we have what I call going solo, which are just 3 pieces to have a go at, and try to do them in the way we've been talking. If you're preparing for an exam, look through the piece for 30 seconds. You get an exam. Look through it for about 30 seconds and try to assimilate all that we've been talking about. Try to feel you get to the point where you're thinking, I know how this goes. I'm going to play it. It's not going to be a problem. So these are the thoughts in your mind. I see it. I understand it. I hear it internally. I'm going to have a play now. That's basically the sequence of events. So, a very important rule. Don't sight read things you don't understand. Try to feel, I understand this. There's no point. If you do something you don't understand and you make mistakes and you don't really understand it, what's the point in doing that? You've just wasted a bit of time. Always try to sight read things you do understand. Make sure you get to that point before you read it. If you want to get better at sight reading, you will. There is no doubt about that. It is a technique, just like playing the clarinet, just like playing the saxophone. Commit yourself to develop your sight reading skill and you will do it. Some people simply can't sight read. It's not true. It's not true. We can all learn to sight read, and we can all learn to sight read to really quite a high level. Here is a code that Favour Music, my publishers, have given us. If you go to the Favour Music shop, that's the address below, and you want to buy one of my sight reading books, I think for the next month or so, it'll give you the opportunity to type in a code, and I think it's 20% discount actually. They've been very generous. So type in that code and you'll get that 20% discount. So there we are, some thoughts on improving your sight reading, and do feel very confident that you can improve your sight reading. It's just a technique, just like playing our instruments, and if you approach it in this systematic way, you will improve your sight reading. You will become really good at it, and all those benefits we talked about earlier will be yours.